It was in the early 80s when I was about 8. My family was visiting my uncle who lived in the backwoods of Missouri. He lived on a lot of land. The only other people who really even lived on the street were relatives, so nobody ever just happened to be out there. This meant that nobody even locked their doors, because random family members were always coming by. So one night while we're there, my parents, auntie and uncle decided to go to a nearby town to go bowling. My brothers, who were 11 and 12, and my female cousins, who's 6 and 14, and I stayed at home. It was still daylight when the adults left, but it started raining very hard and got dark very quickly. We used to play this game that was essentially hide and seek in the dark home, but we cleverly called it Vampire. There was a thin little mattress on the living room floor that some of the kids would sleep on at night. So the person who was it would lie down on the mattress and fold it over themselves like a coffin, count down to midnight. When they got to midnight, they went around looking for you. All of the lights were off and you tried to make it back to the coffin before you got caught. Because the home was in the country, it was pitch black at night. I mean, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. This meant that you couldn't see where the vampire was looking, so you just had to make a break for it. If you were extremely lazy, you could hide in the living room with the coffin and get to the base quickly. Ben, my 11-year-old brother, was it, and was doing the normal countdown. I was hiding maybe 6 feet away from him. As he was counting, there was a flash of lightning. I don't know if I was already looking down at the living room window or if the lightning made me look, but with the backlight from the lightning, I was able to see a face. There's a man with his face pressed up against the window. He had his hands on each side of his face as if he's trying to peer in to see exactly what people were doing. I could feel every hair on my body stand on end. Immediately, I began trying to convince myself that I didn't see what I just saw. But then Ben whispered, "If anyone is hiding there, stay still." I sort of croaked out and, "I'm here," right as there was another flash of lightning. The creeper was still there, but was no longer trying to look into the window. He was now looking towards the front door. Ben and I immediately knew what was coming next. From where we were standing, the creeper was probably about 5 feet away from the front door. Ben was the same distance, but there was a couch between him and the door. Ben leaped over and locked the door right as the creeper went for the handle. At this point, I guess Ben decided that it was best to let the creeps know that the people were home and that we knew he was there, because he flipped on the porch light and started turning on the lights in the home. This is gonna sound so weird, but I was too terrified to even panic. Having said that, I was relying completely on Ben to tell me and let me know what to do. He told me to go lock the door, and was yelling for everybody to come out and lock all the windows. Honestly, the next few minutes were a haze in my mind. I remembered everything up until this point extremely clearly. Then, I remembered the end very clearly. I know that I went to lock the side door, and then the sliding glass door on the back of the home. We've talked about it over the years. Some people remembered us seeing him out the back door as well. What I really clearly recall is locking the sliding glass door and standing there frozen and hearing Ben, in a very calm but firm voice, say, "Close the curtain." "Okay, close the curtain." So I did, but can't remember that part. I just remember my fear and Ben's voice. We did try and call the police, but my auntie and uncle had a stupid party line. It didn't work. Whether from the storm or from a neighbour leaving, it didn't work. For the record, they're the only people that I've ever known with a party line, so this wasn't normal to me either. But for those of you who don't know, multiple people on the street would actually share a phone line. It would have different rings for different households, but you could listen to the phone and listen to your neighbour's conversation. We also tried to summon help on my CB radio, but couldn't reach anyone. My uncle was a hunter. He had a gun rack full of rifles in his room, but my older cousin was out of town hunting and took all of them with him. All we could find was a BB gun that looked real. I remembered Ben putting me on the phone and Scott on CB duty while he stood there with that little square window. He then pulled out the BB gun and aimed it. Maybe 30 minutes later, Ben said, "He's back, he's coming up the driveway." The rest of us froze in fear, but Ben opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch, pointing the gun. He said, "Get out here right now." Then we hear our cousin Kyle, who lived down the road a bit, say, "You know that's a BB gun, right?" Even though Kyle was only 15, I remembered that we felt like we had been saved when he showed up. Kyle was very skeptical of what we said, like we were playing a prank on him, even though we had no idea that he was coming, but he stayed with us until our parents come home. Honestly, I don't remember if we even told our parents what happened when they got home. There was definitely no police involvement. We just went on with our trip. I work in a theatre. I had been let off a couple of hours early. I had to wait for my ride to come pick me up, because I lived on the other side of town from the theatre. This happens a lot, and while it's inconvenient, I like to go inside the theatres and watch whatever movie is playing while I wait. It passes the time. I decided to watch 20 minutes of Red Sparrow. It was playing in one of the larger auditoriums. I went and sat down in one of the areas that is assigned to the screen, row D. Now in my theatre, we actually have assigned seating. When people purchase their tickets at the beginning of the transaction, they're guaranteed that space for 2 hours, and they're supposed to adhere to whatever seat they're sitting in, no matter what. We have a very strict no switching seats policy. So I looked behind me and saw the outlines of 2 people. Just 2. It was a slow Wednesday. One of them was up in row I or L, and the other one was closer in row G. So anyway, the film went on, and I heard them saying, "This is stupid. Yeah, this is really bad." I identified the voice of the person sitting in G because I work there. I'm very accustomed to identifying distributions and notifying the manager. This man kept on muttering other things and started swearing a lot. I was about to alert the manager when he rose from his seat. I watched as he stood up in the aisle and froze for a few seconds. His eyes were on the screen. Then he started walking down towards the exit. I thought he was going to leave and demand a refund, and my alertness dropped. I was relieved because he seemed clearly hostile and angry. I was happy to see him go away, but to my annoyance, he didn't. Instead, he stood on the ramp leading to the exit and just started jangling his keys like he was playing with them. He was tossing them around as if he was trying to play with them or something. He kept on muttering to himself. I then felt dread. You know that feeling you get when you believe something bad is about to happen? Yeah, I felt it, and it was horrible. I looked behind me one final time, and I shouldn't have. Suddenly, he moved very quickly and erratically and took a seat exactly 2 away from me. In the entire theatre, he chose that seat. It was on purpose. I have long hair, and through my long hair and peripheral vision, I could see that he'd tilted his head now and was staring directly at me. He was grinning. He was an older white man, at least 60 years old. I waited 2 minutes. The entire time he kept his gaze on me. Eventually, I got up and walked towards the exit. I called my ride and asked where she was. As I stood in the doorway between the theatre and exit, I saw the man slowly turn his head and stare directly at me. I felt the eyes on me, grinning still. I opened the exit door and ran. I ended up telling the management about how strange the man was. I have no idea how it ended up being dealt with. I was 12, and my older sister and I were home alone for the weekend. I was waiting for a friend to pick me up and getting restless. There was a knock on the door. Thinking it was her, I ran over to answer it without checking through the peephole. A man was standing there with a clipboard, and he said that he needed to check out our gas meter. I was entrenched in the disappointment of my friend still not having arrived. I told him, "Yeah, sure, whatever, do what you gotta do." I noticed at the time, he wasn't dressed as a city official. He had a green and purple shirt on, with bold stripes like the host of the Blues Clues. He came in and immediately went up the stairs to where our bedrooms were and walked into the door of my room. The typical girly room, with glitter and stuff everywhere. Thank God my sister came down the stairs at almost the exact same moment. She said, "Oh, isn't that John's dad? Why is he going upstairs?" I then complained back to her saying that John wasn't here and what was going on, and she was annoying me. My sister then cut me off. Wait, if John isn't here, who's that?" "Oh, he's here to check the gas meters." Her face then turned white. She flung open the front door and dragged me out. Hand clamped over my mouth. She said, "Our gas meter is outside." Neither of us had a cell phone. It was in the 1960s, and obviously, we weren't going back into the home to call the authorities on the landline. Then my sister had a stroke of genius. She saw a guy walking past our home and motioned him over. She called loudly into the home, "Oh, Dad, it's good you're home. A man from the city is here reading the gas meter upstairs." And just like she had hoped, this man on the street said, "What are you talking about?" The man in the striped shirt bolted out of the home. The man on the street asked us repeatedly if we were okay, if we needed him to stay and wait in the yard with us until our mum and dad come home. He was very sweet. We were so startled that we barely thanked him before slamming the door shut and locking all the windows. Now, as irate as my sister was that I let somebody into the home, she begged me not to call the authorities, because my parents left her in charge and she was worried she'd get into trouble. I really didn't want to catch any heat from this, so I just agreed. 3 weeks later, a girl in our community went missing. The same MO. She was home alone, and authorities found her door open and no signs of a forced entry. My sister and I discussed our options, but deep down, we knew that we had to come clean. We told the police everything. I don't know if it ever helped, but they did tell us that they had reason to believe it is the same person. They also tracked down the man who helped us on the street. Turns out, we already knew him. He worked in the butcher shop, just didn't recognize him. He was lifelong friends with the family after that. Our parents were mortified. They weren't angry with us, just glad that we didn't get hurt. Though they did review all the rules of caution and didn't let us stay home alone. They found the girl and said that she'd been held for a few days, then burned alive. Sadly, they never caught the guy, but at least I know that he's dead by now because he was in his 30s in the 1960s. I just thank God every day for my sister's resourcefulness and quick thinking. Before I begin, you should know that I live in a very shady part of Melbourne, Australia. It's had its fair share of shootings, robberies and creepy folk, which is highly unusual for this country. So I understand that it's not unusual for this kind of thing to happen in my town. I live with my sister and her partner in a small home after moving away from my parents. I've always lived in a small country town or rural areas, so I've never experienced life in a bigger, more suburban area. It was only about a month ago when I was lying in bed hot. I'd left my window open to take advantage of the non-existent breeze. I remembered how it was hard to relax, and I felt some relief when I finally drifted off to sleep. That's when I started hearing crunching on the gravel from the garden right outside my window. They were footsteps. They're unmistakable and so close to me. It jolted me awake. I actually thought that I'd imagined it, but I knew that I'd heard it. I froze in place, and then this coldness washed over me. That's when I heard the sound of tapping at my window. It was so close to where I was lying. That's when I remembered that I'd left my window open. No mesh screen to protect me or anything. No lock. Nothing. All I could think about was somebody climbing in. Now I must have been lying there for about an hour when I saw a bright light of the torch pointed against my curtains. It was only there for a second before they turned it off. It then seemingly disappeared after that. To this day, I have no idea who it was or what their intentions were. My mum owns her own business and works extremely hard. This means that she spends many late nights sitting on the living room floor with her work sprawled out around her. One night back in 2003, she had a typical routine going on, sorting through paperwork and making piles. It was late, close to midnight on a Wednesday, so when the phone rang, she was a bit surprised. My dad worked a third shift at the factory, so she assumed it was him. When she answered the phone, there was no reply, just lots of heavy breathing. Admittedly, she hung up and called my dad, creeped out. He told her that he hadn't called her, and she left it at that. Keep in mind this is almost 15 years ago, and we live in a small town with practically no crime. We never locked our doors, and we're never scared of dangerous people. But the phone keeps calling, every night, multiple times a night, and the person on the other end even started talking. He started by saying, "Hello Diane, you're beautiful. I'd love to meet you." Things escalated, and he got into graphic detail of how he wanted to do terrible things to her. Of course she stopped answering the phone and called the police, but nothing was ever done, and the phone calls just kept on coming. My parents weren't in the situation where my dad could stay home from work. My mum truly believed that the calls were just empty threats, but things continued on. One night he got brave. My mum was sitting on the floor in front of the huge mirrored cabinet with all of her work around her when the phone rang. She ignored it like normal. She was concentrating hard on a piece of paper in front of her when a glimmer of light caught her eye in the mirror. She looked up to see a pair of glasses staring at her through the mirror. She spun around to the front door, and she saw that a man was there staring at her. She said that they both just stared at each other for what felt like forever until she saw the doorknob turn. She was froze with fear, but eventually let out a scream. The man quickly ran away. In light of the phone calls, my parents started locking all the doors, which was a totally foreign concept to our household. My older brother, who was about 17 at the time, was aware of the phone calls and come running downstairs with a baseball bat, but the man was long gone. When the police come, they secured our property and looked over it and found close to 200 cigarette butts underneath our living room windows behind bushes. He'd been watching us there for months. The police also happened to find a bike tire coming off from the windows and going down a sidewalk. They took the cigarette butts away for DNA testing and were able to match them to a convicted rapist who lived down the street from us. So I work in the service industry for beauty, etc. A few years ago, there was a very strange, very creepy client who had come in for a series of treatments, which meant me and 3 other girls would see him several times a week. He would always come to his appointments with weird things like a book about lucid dreaming and whatnot. He's really creepy. We all agreed that he was a complete weirdo. Luckily, after a few weeks, we were free from his crazy self. Fast forward to this past winter. He calls in out of the blue. He says that he wants to start these treatments again. I begged my boss not to have him come in, but there wasn't really a reason not to have him. He's in his early 20s, rich, and wants to spend all of his mum's money. and he was speaking to me over the phone. He remembered everything about me and began to apologise for being rude in the past. The first few treatments my co-worker would do with me, but after a few weeks she couldn't work that late anymore, so I was alone. He constantly tried to get me alone in the room with him. First he would be asking questions about the treatment, then more about myself. On more than one occasion, he was definitely high out of his mind and would say the weirdest things. Saying this, it doesn't sound too bad, but picture a serial killer, like the ones from movies and how they would behave. I'm not even joking, he was the scariest person that I've ever met in my life. The day I finally had enough was when he come in wearing a suit. During the treatment, he complimented me over and over again, then asked me about how I felt being murdered. He then went on to say about how women are horrible. I become increasingly nervous, and he would try laugh or contain his laughter while he was talking about murder and stuff. After his treatment was done, I immediately called him a cab. He would usually ask me to do it, but I did it way earlier than he actually wanted. Just before he left, he said that, "I find it adorable that you're so vulnerable." He then stood there staring at me with honestly the coldest eyes that I've ever seen, not even a slight smirk. I then almost started bawling my eyes out right in front of him. I could feel my heart racing and I was sweating profusely. Before he left, he said he forgot something in the room, and stood there waiting for me to go and get it for him. Now if I actually went into that room, he could have easily followed me and blocked the doorway. I could have easily been trapped in there. After 8 AM, it was winter and very dark out. The streets around me are dead. The other tenants in the buildings always leave at about 5 or 6. He just stood there staring at me as I sat at my desk, literally clutching a pair of scissors away from his view. He then came in and grabbed the item that he had forgotten and asked me to help clean up, which obviously I said no, and locked the door as he was gone. I watched him get into his cab and then ran to my car, literally crying the hardest I've ever cried in my life. He called several more days later and tried to explain to my co-workers that he thought that he scared me and wanted to say sorry. I never spoke to him again. I told my boss what happened, to which he banned him from ever returning. A friend of mine's house burnt to the ground when I was younger, and his family moved across the street in a home that they rented for a bit. The basement in said house was unfinished, so being middle schoolers, we decided we would use a basement to ride skateboards and scooters. So after one night of skateboarding, we headed upstairs to watch scary movies and then pass out. Neither of his parents nor sister were home. As we were getting close to sleep, we hear something hit the ground really hard on the concrete of the basement. Being the dumb teenagers that we were, we decided to investigate. As we opened the door to the basement, we peered down. We just see a skateboard floating there. We sit and watch it for a few seconds, then it suddenly and violently drops. Needless to say, we packed up our stuff and sprint back to my home. Not much sleep happened that night. His family moved out soon after, and we never knew what actually caused this or what was going on in that basement. This story is about an event that happened to my mother around 1972. She was 8 years old at the time. She told me about this since I was young, and she truly thinks this affected her to this day. To set the scene, both of my grandparents run a restaurant and gas station in our hometown. They've always run a business of some type since the 50s. This means that a lot of the days my mum would have to take the school bus home and stay by herself if my grandma had to stay and help run things. My uncle, her older brother, would usually come home on the bus with her, but he was a little older and sometimes had football practice. The same happened on the day of this event I'm about to say. So my mother arrived home on this day, let herself in the home and put her stuff away. She just recently received a new puppy and knew the first thing that she needed to do was to take the puppy out to the yard to use the restroom. She was wrapping the dog in a white towel and walked him outside. She then put the dog down and shook the hair out of the blanket. As she does so, she then noticed the neighbour's son watching her from across the street. The guy's in his late 20s and known for being very strange and mentally ill. He would do really psycho stuff, like skinning the neighbour's cats and hanging them from their clothing line, or killing the neighbour's pigs. My mum said he would always creep her out and everybody else. She said that he would stare at her when she would play outside and made her feel generally uncomfortable. She said that he appeared out of nowhere that day and appeared in the yard. As she was shaking out the blanket, he began grinning and waving. Feeling more than a little shook, she picked up her puppy and went inside and locked the door. She began to do some homework after that. She then heard a loud knock at the door. She slowly walked towards the window to see who it was. She knew it wasn't her grandparents because of course they had keys. As she opens the blinds, her eyes locked with those of the creep from across the street. Like he was already looking into the window. She jumped and was scared. She screamed a little and shut the blinds. She walked to the door and made sure it was locked. She said he just continued with a slow continuous thud on the door, almost like in a rhythm. Then, she got terrified as he began speaking to her through the door, saying, "Hi sweetie, come on, let me in, I just want to see your puppy." In full freaked out mode, my mum screamed, "You need to leave me alone now and go back to your home, I don't know you." He kept on knocking. I can see the fear in my mum's eyes when she describes that part. It gives my whole body chills. He said, "Damn it, let me in. I saw you waving your flag of surrender." So this guy thought that my mum shaking off the hair from the blanket was her surrendering. My mum screamed, "I'm calling my dad and the police if you don't leave now." With this, the knocking stopped. She tried to catch her breath as she was shaken with fear. She then got up from the door and ran to the basement level of the home. She made it to the phone and began to dial 911. All of a sudden, she heard a shatter from the next room. She looked over to see the crazed neighbour attempting to crawl through the kitchen window. He was ripping down the curtain as his upper body got through, and my mother screamed and said what was happening to the police on the phone. All of a sudden, he was bleeding from the abdomen where the glass had cut him as he tried to lie himself through. Then my mum began hearing my grandmother's screams. "What the hell are you doing?" Then the guy yelling out in pain and squirmed out the window as she hit him from behind with some kind of tool that was laying on her garden. He managed to get out of the window and bolted to the house. The police come. My grandma called my grandfather. He come over instantly. Now they arrested him for breaking and entering and something else I believe that was unrelated. Probation violation, I think. On the day of his court date, he told them the white flag of surrender story. This is all they needed to hear to put him in a mental institution on that day. We were climbing a utility shaft behind a lecture hall that ran up the length of the building. At the bottom of the shaft were 2 or 3 boxes filled with these black and white pictures of mannequins. Some were out of focus headshots of faceless mannequins, some were pictures of them in compromising positions, and some were just generic looking shots. After climbing up 3 or 4 stories, we found a mattress and blanket. Now on its own, that would just be sad and curious, but with the pictures, it added a new layer to the creepiness. I'd hate to think what kind of people would live there and what they were doing with them pictures, or where they ended up. I'm into cave exploration. I know it's scary and dangerous, but I get a really big kick out of it, an adrenaline rush. Now I've been in some pretty tight situations and had some scary things happen to me before. Usually it's if you hear an animal near the entrance, or if you get lost. I mean, getting lost can be deadly, but as long as you're calm and know what you're doing, you can find your way out. But something happened to me that I cannot explain, and I could not remain calm during. So one time I was very deep into a cave that I've explored lots of times. I decided to take a route that I haven't before. I got a really weird vibe the moment that I went into this part of the cave. Now within 2 minutes, my light started dimming and went off after a few seconds. I quickly put another battery in and couldn't get it to come back on. As I was standing there, I heard somebody whisper, "I can help you out, buddy." I then did an instant 180 and started sprinting the way that I come from. I got a little lost on the way out, but I was so full of adrenaline that I didn't stop running. I ran all the way home and I never went cave exploring since.